So it's been my sense or my observation that there's millions of people all over the planet these days that are meditating. But why are they meditating, and what's the point? Because a lot of people think it's a good idea to meditate, and so many people seem to agree that there must be something good about it. There must be something positive about it. But it would be good to know what that is, don't you think? A lot of very respected, wise people seem to think meditation's a very good thing to do, a good practice, a good thing to do, a good experience to have. So there must be some reason why, don't you think? So first of all, I want to orient the experience of meditation first of all, right? We want to orient it. What does it actually have to do with? If we would say that reality as a whole, whatever it is, everything that exists and doesn't exist, the seen and the unseen, the known and the unknown, everything that, right, ever was and ever could be, the totality of everything. So if you say reality as a whole, if you say reality is whatever it is as a whole, you call it 100%, right? So we just say the totality of everything being 100%. And then what we want to do then is we want to say, well, okay, and then we just draw a line in the middle. And so we say the bottom half is what we're going to call the unmanifest. The unmanifest, or the unbecome, or what the Buddha called the unborn. So what the unmanifest, or the unbecome, or the unborn, as the Buddha would call it, is what the Buddhists call the void. It's empty void. A void where there is no thing. The void is empty of everything, including time and space. So there's no thing whatsoever. Nothing, no thing exists in the void. It's empty. Understand what I'm saying? Absolutely, completely empty of everything. T-H-I-N-G, right? Now this void, you call it a no place, because it's not even a place, right? Yep. It's objectless, spaceless, timeless, thoughtless. So this void, or this, if you call it a void, or it's an empty ground, is the same void or empty ground that we all came from. You remember? You've heard that 14 billion years ago we all came from a void, didn't we? There was 14 billion years ago there was nothing. And then something came from nothing, right? Heard of that? That's what they say. So this void, so this void is the same void that we all came from 14 billion years ago. See what I'm saying? 14 billion years ago, there was nothing, and then something came from nothing. And now 14 billion years later, we're having this conversation. Right? You with me? Now everything that exists came from this void, and it's still happening right now. So if we want to take reality as a whole, you see, you take a reality as a whole, we just say, well, half of everything that is, it's an arbitrary number. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter, but we just say, just draw it in half. You say there's the manifest and the unmanifest. The manifest is what exists, and the unmanifest is what does not exist. See? It means when we say it doesn't exist, it means there's no time there. There's no space. no thought. It's a vacuum. So the point of meditation, or one of the points of meditation, is to actually have the conscious experience, is actually to be able to have the conscious experience of that unmanifest dimension, of that unmanifest void. It's the empty ground that you've come from, and I've come from, see? And that you're always coming from. We're always, we emerged from there 14 billion years ago, but we're also emerging there from that same place all the time. In any case, one of the many miraculous aspects of meditation is that if, especially if one's meditation is deep, profound, is that one awakens to a completely different dimension of reality. That there's a sense, that there's a sense of having woken up. In other words, if you have a deep experience of meditation, you almost feel you've woken up from being in a very small little chamber, right? And almost becoming aware of some infinite context that you were not aware of before, right? Just being lost in a narrow little chamber, a narrow little box, and then there's a sense of waking up to what, especially when there's real depth, can feel like an infinite context. Does that make sense? Now, the point is that the infinite context that you awaken to on an experiential level, is nothing less than this ground of being, or this unmanifest void itself. It's a literal place or no place. It's not just a quiet place in your head. So I'm just trying to orient everybody here. I'm just trying to help to orient you. That what you awaken to is the other half, for lack of a better way of pointing it. You're literally awakening to the other half of reality. And you can say, well, it's half of reality, but even that half itself, if you say, well, where does this empty ground begin? Where does it end? It doesn't have a beginning and it doesn't have an ending. So it's good to begin to think a little bit about this. So what you're beginning to become aware of when you experience a deep state of meditation, if there's real depth, what happens is the experience of compulsive identification with the thought process begins to slow down and slow down. And if you're really lucky, it might stop altogether. But as your compulsive identification with thought begins to slow down, and your identification with emotion and memory and time and self, body, all these things, if you really go deep, there's a sense of really going beyond all boundaries whatsoever. Really, and you really begin to experience this boundaryless no place, because it's not a place like this table's in a place, or here, right? And it's a big thing. Imagine if you have no conscious experience or sense that the very ground that you have emerged from and are emerging from is this empty place where there's no time and no space and no thought, and no memory, and no thing, and no you. Imagine if you had no sense of that. Imagine if you had no sense of it, because if you had no sense of it, you would believe, or you'd be convinced, or you'd imagine, however you want to put it, that the manifest dimension, where there's time and space and history, right? Time, space, and history, and evolution. You think that's all there was. I mean, that's a lot. Obviously, more than our little minds can even begin to comprehend, but still, you'd feel that the dimension of time and space and becoming, the evolving universe, you'd say, well, that's everything. No, it's not. It's only half the picture. So let's say, what now? I say, why is it important? Well, you see, it's important for a lot of reasons, but one reason it's important. There's many reasons why this is important, because you see, if a human being wants to be free, which we haven't even begun to talk about yet, but if a human being wants to be free, wants to evolve spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, philosophically, and ethically, also spiritually, if you want to evolve, right? Part of the desire for evolution is an aspiration. It's an aspiration towards greater freedom, right? Greater freedom, isn't there? A surging, growing, developing aspiration towards greater freedom. I want to experience greater freedom, right? So as one begins to awaken to this aspiration towards greater freedom, what would it really mean, and how could I possibly, what would it mean, and how could I possibly experience such a thing? But what would it actually mean to be free? So one way, and this is also the traditional Eastern way, and this is not necessarily something I'm particularly teaching anymore. I'm teaching something slightly different, but just to give you a little classical background and understanding. Anyway, in the traditional Eastern sense, to be free has very much to do with what we've begun to talk about. Now, if you for most of your life have, out of ignorance, which means lack of deeper experience and lack of deeper understanding, lack of deeper experience, if you, up until this point in your life, have had no experiential sense of the unmanifest dimension of the void, if you have no intellectual knowledge of it, like no one ever told you about it, right? No one told you about it, and you've never experienced it, and then you suddenly had the experience, as I was saying before, it would be like suddenly jumping into an ocean, right? It'd be like if you were locked up in a room, and then you were thrown in the middle of the ocean, right? Wouldn't it? Okay, so you see, from the perspective of manifestation, from the perspective of time and of evolution, you see, who you are always has a historical context, right? Who you are as a human being right now always has a historical context. So you can have, in the more relative personal context, it means I am, for example, if it was me, say I'm Andrew. I was born, 48 years ago in New York City with such and such a personal history, etc. Right? So there's a personal historical context there, right? Very much defined. That whole sense of self-sense, the self-sense or the I-sense is very much defined by this personal historical developmental context. Isn't that true? So in this sense, this idea or sense of being who I am is completely defined by that, and that's all there is. See? And then also, you see, and then also, so that's the personal context right there, right? And you could even make it bigger. You say, okay, well, that's Andrew's personal little history there. But then you could say, no, you could expand who you are. Culturally, you could look at who you are as a product of culture. You could go in many directions. I could look at who am I as a product of, for example, maybe my Jewish history. 5,000 years. A lot to work with right there. So that gets a lot bigger than just 48 years. Right? So there's a personal, historical context to that too. That gives me my sense of myself, right? Not in my case, but in any case, it could, right? And then I could even, it could even make it bigger. And they say maybe forget even the tribal context. Maybe just look at the human context. Maybe just take it back 100,000 years. Just look at it in terms of human development. Right? But it's still, the self sense is still seen in terms of development. Right? The I sense, I'm part of that. Right? Now what happens is, when you leap into the void, when you experience this void, you're free from the whole thing. You see? When you experience the unmanifest realm where everything came from, like this, it's like everything's cut. There's no time, there's no history, there's no development. It's all gone. The personal dimension, which is what we're so attached to and what causes us to suffer so much, is gone. So there's no personal, the personal is all gone. But even bigger than that, the larger developmental streams are all gone too. So for example, the Jewish problem's gone. Or whatever it happens to be, The Dutch problem, the German problem. We can go in any direction we want. But basically it all boils down to be the same thing, you see? It's all part of your personal historical developmental stream, you see? Right? And when we look at it, it can get pretty profound and very big and long and deep, right? It's a self-sense. And when you look at it in these big, broad historical sweeps, it can become very profound and powerful. But then, when you leap into the unmanifest, in the unmanifest dimension, it's all gone. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, what does it mean when you say it's all gone? It means it actually never happened. Do you remember? 14 billion years ago, something came from nothing, zero, no thing. Zero means no thing. Everything came from nothing. So when you experience this unmanifest ground, this place where nothing, it's what the Buddha called the unborn, there nothing has happened. Nothing has occurred. Nothing has occurred. You haven't been born. The universe hasn't even been born. Right? You understand the big relief. You need to take this seriously, you see, because you have to really begin to understand because when people have these experiences, they often actually they're not really meditating deeply enough or even thinking deeply enough about their own experience to know how to interpret it, what does it all actually mean? So when you experience this realm, because this realm, the unmanifest realm, unmanifest dimension, didn't disappear 14 billion years ago. It's ever present. It's the ever-present ground out of which everything is emerging constantly. It's arbitrarily. It's half of what you are, right? Me and all of us. It's you also. Right? Half of what you are is manifest, unmanifest, manifest, unmanifest. So when you experience this deep meditation, you're experiencing that's this empty ground where there's no time, there's no space, there's no universe, there's no you, there's no me, there's no nothing. There literally isn't, and there never has been, and never will be. This is an important point. There never has been and never will be, because the unborn means unborn. There nothing is born there. There's no emergence. There never has been, and there never will be.